Hello everyone and welcome to another running video. It's Thursday the 20th of August. It's about 6:45 in the morning. I'm on my morning run. I'm about 5k's in, and I didn't film before this because it was not enough light to make it worthwhile, and you would have got that flickering effect you sometimes get on the camera from street lights and car lights and so on. This is an unusual format that this video is filmed in. I don't recall making any adjustments to the camera, but it just came out in this very small format, so hopefully there's enough for you to see, to enjoy the scenery, and if not, well, hopefully the commentary is interesting enough for you to stay tuned and follow through to the end of what I'm talking about. In this video I'm going to do the third of what I'm calling my civics videos. In the first video I talked about the Australian electoral system and I explained how it works, especially in relation to the House of Representatives, and I explained a little bit about preferential voting. In the second video I talked about how a person becomes the Prime Minister of Australia. I explained that despite the best wishes of some people or the best hopes of some people, we do not directly vote for the Prime Minister in Australia. The idea of the Westminster parliamentary democracy does not allow for that sort of thing. It allows you to vote for a person to represent your electorate or your area in the Commonwealth Parliament, and then there are a whole lot of other conditions before somebody becomes the Prime Minister. But a direct vote for the Prime Minister is not how the Westminster electoral system works. In this video I'm going to talk about the position of Governor General. And I'm doing these videos because I think there are some people who have a misunderstanding of how the system works, and sometimes they say things that they think are correct but actually aren't, and other times I think there are people who say things that they know are not correct but they say them anyway, and their purpose is to spread misinformation perhaps, or even sometimes create dissension, or perhaps clicks for their videos or posts or whatever. Whereas what I'm trying to do here is explain as clearly and as properly as I can the position of the Governor General, and hopefully at the end of the video, if you didn't know anything about the Governor General, you'll know more than you did when you started. So to understand why there is a Governor General and what the Governor General does, we need to go back into Australia's history a little bit. We need to go back to the time before the 1st of January 1901. Now, what's important about the 1st of January 1901 is when the Commonwealth of Australia came into existence. On that date, federation, that is the joining together of what were all the 6 colonies at the time, happened, and the Commonwealth of Australia came into existence. That's the proper name for Australia, the Commonwealth of Australia. We just call ourselves Australia, but the proper name is the Commonwealth. And how that came about is that going back into the late 1890s, people like Sir Henry Parkes, who had been the Premier of New South Wales, were looking at Australia and saying this idea of 6 separate colonies all doing their own things all the time doesn't make any sense. There are things that are national things, trade, defence, foreign affairs, for example, and they need to be dealt with by one government that represents us all. There are other things that each state government can take care of, for example, hospitals, schools, roads, and so forth. And so Sir Henry Parkes and his friends put forward the idea of federation, of all the states coming together, all the colonies coming together, becoming states and joining one body that would be called the Commonwealth of Australia. Each colony, as it was then, voted, and they all agreed to join the Commonwealth, and when they agreed to join the Commonwealth, they agreed to adopt a set of rules. That is the constitution that said how the Commonwealth would operate, what it would do, and the rules about how it would work. It should be noted that Western Australia was somewhat of a reluctant joiner to start off with, but they did ultimately decide to join, and that New Zealand was asked if they would like to join the Commonwealth, and they said thanks, but no thanks. And so the Commonwealth of Australia, and consequently the Commonwealth government, came into existence on the 1st of January 1901, and the constitution that set out the rules for how that government would operate established the position of Governor General. It's called Governor General because each other state, or each state as it became, each colony before that had its own governor, and so to give the federal position a bit more oomph, if you like, they called it the Governor General. The Governor General has a couple of jobs, some of which are ceremonial, but others of which are quite important. One of those is the Governor General is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Now obviously they take advice from the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defence and the military chiefs and so on, but the position is that the Governor General is the Commander-in-Chief of the Australian Armed Forces. And the second really important thing that the Governor General does is act on behalf of the monarch, that is the King or Queen of the United Kingdom, and do things on their behalf. And the big thing that they do is that they sign legislation, give it what's called royal assent, which means that the monarch has approved of the legislation, and the act of signing it or giving it royal assent turns it from a piece of legislation or a bill into a law. Now this was done because the people who proposed the idea of federation and wrote the Constitution still wanted Australia to have an attachment to the United Kingdom, and that attachment would be through the Crown. And so in practical terms, the King or Queen cannot come to Australia every 3 months or every 6 months and sign a bunch of documents. So it was agreed that the Governor General would act with the authority of the King or Queen and would act in their stead. Now, to act means that they have the authority to do things that the King or Queen would do, but obviously they need to keep the King or Queen of England, in this case it's a king, so we might just refer to him as the king from now on. They need to keep the king informed. Now, I doubt that they ring up the king every day and say, listen, I signed that bill today, and next week I'm signing that bill, and last week I signed that bill. But at some point there would be conversations about legislation that has become law that the Governor General has signed, and there would be a discussion about what's happening in Australian politics. Now, the King has no influence over Australian politics, and the Governor General, except in exceptional circumstances, generally has no influence over the day-to-day running of the government or what happens in Australian politics. But we know, and if you were around and remember back to 1975, the Governor General does have in the Constitution some reserve powers which say that in certain circumstances, if the Governor General feels it is necessary, the Governor General can dismiss the elected government. Now that has only happened once, and I don't think that anyone who was alive in 1975 and old enough to remember what was happening would ever advocate it happening again. The question of whether the government was good or bad or otherwise is separate to whether the Governor General should dismiss the government. But the Governor General certainly has the power to do that. So the reason we have a Governor General is because the Constitution says we should have one, and the Governor General's job is to sign and give royal assent to legislation that is passed by the Parliament. Now, in trying to find out what, if any, were the rules governing who could or could not be Governor General, I could not find any clear statement that said, in the same way as there is a statement that says you can't be a Member of Parliament unless you are an Australian citizen, not bankrupt and not convicted of a crime that carries a prison term of 1 year or more, I could not find a set of things like that. In fact, it was not until 1931, when Sir Isaac Isaacs became the Governor General, that the Governor General was in fact an Australian-born person. Up till then, they were people who'd been born in the United Kingdom. I don't think even now the requirement is that the person be Australian born. I would assume that the person would have to be a person who is not convicted of a criminal offence. You could probably get away with a speeding ticket or a parking fine when you were much younger, but other criminal offences, I would imagine, would rule you out of the position. And for the most part, there have been one or two exceptions to this rule. You would have to be a person of reasonably good character, because after all, you are going to be representing the King of England, or the King of the United Kingdom, sorry, there's no King of England, he's the King of the United Kingdom. You are going to be representing the King of the United Kingdom in Australia and acting in his stead. We'll get to how the person gets the job and what might be involved in that in a moment, but we're just talking about the person that can be the Governor-General. Now, over the 125 years of Federation, there have been many Governor-Generals. Each Governor-General serves a term of 5 years, and the term can be extended, but rarely is. It's generally thought, well, you had 5 years in the job, it's time to give somebody else a go. And in some cases, there may have been a change of government, and the new government may decide that, well, the previous Governor-General did a good job, and thank you for your service, sir or madam, but we're going to choose somebody else. That's quite normal. We've had people who were academics, that is, been in universities, professors and things like that. We've had people who've been judges of the High Court. We've had people who've been in all sorts of public life, ex-politicians, for example. A couple that I can think of were Sir Paul Hasluck, who was a member of a Liberal government and then became the Governor-General, and Bill Hayden, who, if you recall at the time, I think in 1983 election, was the leader of the Labor Party, and about a month before the election he was deposed and replaced by Bob Hawke, and he at the time quipped that a drover's dog could have won the election, but the Labor Party were nervous that he couldn't win, so they got rid of him, put in Bob Hawke, and when Bob Hawke had the chance to choose his own, the Governor-General, he gave the job to Bill Hayden. So it's logical that the Prime Minister and the Governor-General may know each other. They may have even been friends. I imagine at one stage Hayden and Hawke were probably friends until the displacement. So it's possible that they know each other through various events in public life, and they may have even been friends. But there is a process that is gone through for appointing someone as Governor-General, and that process must be followed. So the Governor-General can be a person from any walk of life. There have been people from the military as well, and there's even been one person who was from the clergy. For the most part, the people who do the job do it with dignity. They carry on their job in the background. They don't draw attention to themselves. And in my lifetime at least, there have been, as far as I'm aware, only two what you might consider controversial appointments of Governor-General. One was the appointment of Sir John Kerr, who was the Governor-General who dismissed the Whitlam government. He was appointed by the Whitlam government and thought to be a friend of the Labor Party, but turned on them. And the other was the appointment of Reverend Peter Hollingworth, who had been a high member of the Anglican Church, and held the position of Governor-General for a couple of years and resigned after there were controversies about how he had handled child abuse accusations when he was in charge of a part of the Catholic Church. I can't remember the exact detail. My memory tells me it was something to do with being the Archbishop of Brisbane, but that may not be correct, so I'm willing to be corrected about that. So various people from all walks of life can in theory be the Governor-General. In reality, I don't think the current government's going to come and ask me, for example, if I want to be Governor-General, and if they did ask me, the answer would be, well, no, I'm a bit old for the job for a start, and I don't really want the responsibility of it. But they're generally chosen from the people who already have a history of service in public life and have already done things in the courts or the military or in academia that have given them a good standing in the community. Now the key question is, well, how does somebody get to be Governor-General? Well, the simple matter is they are appointed. Then it is not an elected position, and it never has been an elected position. Ultimately what happens is that a name of a person who that the Australian government says they want to be the Governor-General is submitted to the palace, as it's referred to, and that is generally Buckingham Palace, where the previous Queen lived, but the King says you're not going to live there, he's going to live somewhere else in the house he already lives in, I guess. But the name of the person that the Australian government wants to be Governor-General is sent to the palace along with a file detailing the background information on this person, what they've done in their previous lives and their previous work, why the government is recommending them to be Governor-General and so on. And the King and his advisors and staff would read that file and look at it and say, well, yes, we accept this recommendation and we agree to the appointment. If they said no, we would not hear about it, because it would be terribly embarrassing for the government and for the individual that was being considered to say, well, your name got all the way to the palace and they said, no, we're not having the bar of you, mate, we want somebody else. We wouldn't hear about that because of that embarrassment, but the name would be rejected and the government would go back to the drawing board. So the government suggests the name of a person. The current Governor-General is appointed in 2022 and serves for a 5-year term, so I suspect that somewhere inside the government at this very moment there are people who are drawing up a list of names and doing what is called due diligence about the people on that list of names to make sure that none of those people have skeletons in their closet and none of those people have anything in their past that would be lead them to be excluded from being the Governor-General. And at some point the preferred candidate will be asked, you're being considered for this job, are you interested in it? If you tell anyone you're being interested in it, your name will be taken away. But it'd be silly to say, just to make an announcement and then the person say, no, I don't want the job. So the government comes up with a list of names. Presumably the Prime Minister has somebody in mind that they would like to have as the Governor-General, and of course they submit their name, and the process of doing due diligence, or vetting as it's called sometimes, is carried out for the person the Prime Minister wants and anybody else that might be on the short list that's been recommended by another minister, for example, or a state premier or something like that. And they look through this person's background, I imagine fairly rigorously, to make sure that, as I said, there are no skeletons in their closet, there are no things that are going to embarrass the government when their name is put forward, there are no things that are going to embarrass the monarch, the king, when the name is presented to him and he says, yes, I'm happy to have that person as my representative in Australia. And then once that process has been gone through and once the monarch, the king, is made aware of the name and has read the file and has agreed that the person whose name has been put forward is a suitable person and that the king is happy for that person to become the Governor-General, then the announcement is made and the Prime Minister of Australia will announce to the Parliament and to the chosen person and say, you know, I've chosen this person to be the Governor-General. The name has been submitted to the palace and His Majesty the King has agreed that that person shall be appointed Governor-General and they shall take up their job from whatever date it is. So the appointment of Sam Moyston as Governor-General would have followed exactly the same procedure as has been followed for her predecessor, who I believe was David Hurley, a military man, and the person before that, and the person before that, and so on. And no doubt the person who succeeds or takes over from Sam Moyston, the process that's followed will be the same. As I said, it is possible that the Prime Minister and the person who is Governor-General have come across each other in their time in public life. Anthony Albanese, for example, has been in Parliament for 30 years. So it's more than likely at some point he has come across Sam Moyston, or whoever it is that will be the next Governor-General. They may even be friends. On the other hand, they may be people that, yes, they've met socially at various functions, but other than that don't really know each other and have no personal connection. All of that is perfectly legitimate. The appointment is made and the appointment is announced. The appointment is approved by the palace and then announced, and the person takes up the job. As I said, it is not an elected position and it never has been. I suppose if we decided we could have an elected Governor-General, the palace, the king, would say, well, I don't necessarily approve of that process, but that's what they're doing in Australia at the moment and they've elected this person and I can't see a reason not to approve that person, so I will. It should be noted here, I should have said this much earlier, but we're talking about the Constitution. When the Constitution was adopted, the framers of the Constitution said, well, we have to have a process for changing the Constitution. Basically, there's something that's in it now that's not right, or circumstances change and we need to change the Constitution. And they established a process. The process is that a majority of voters in a majority of states must approve of the change. So it's what's called the double majority. And what the effect of that has been, that it is since 1901, the Australian public have been asked 45 times, do you want to change the Constitution to allow something to happen? And on only 8 occasions, so less than 20% of the time, have the public said yes. In the double majority, the majority of voters in the majority of states have said yes, we agree to that change to the Constitution. Now, the most recent referendum, if you'll recall, was the referendum to establish the Indigenous voice, or the First Nations voice, to Parliament, and overwhelmingly Australians voted no, said no, we don't want that. So perhaps we take the view that if the Constitution ain't broke, we're not going to fix it. We're happy with it the way it is, and only, as I said, in less than 20% of cases has the public said, yes, we can see the need to change the Constitution and either remove that thing or put that thing in. For example, the really big one that I can remember in my lifetime was the 1967 referendum that allowed Aboriginal people for the very first time to be counted in the census, and the effect of that was that the Commonwealth government was then allowed to make laws about Aboriginal people, because up until that point, the question of Aboriginal people, as was called, was a matter for each state. So that was a big decision at the time, and one of the few referenda that I can remember being passed. If we were to have an elected person as Governor General, people say we should become a republic and break all of our ties with the British Crown and the British monarchy, and that's a decision that we've been asked and said no, but we could consider that again at another time if there was an overwhelming pressure for it. But there would be a lot of questions about how the head of state, the person who would perhaps not be called Governor General, but whatever they were called, how would they get their position? Would there be an election? If there was more than one candidate, there was going to be an election. If the government just nominated somebody, there'd be no point in having an election. If the government nominated someone, it would not be dramatically different from the situation that is now. If there was an election, would it be a first past the post system, or would it be a preferential voting system like we use for all our other elections, in which case the candidates would swap preferences, and it would be very much like every other election, and that would be a matter of whether we decided that's what we wanted for our head of state or not. So that's my explanation of what the Governor General does, why we have one, and how they're appointed. If you have a comment, please leave it in the appropriate spot, and when I become aware of it, I will respond. Thanks for watching. If you're out running, enjoy your run. If you're running on the weekend in park run, listen to the briefing, thank the volunteers at the end, and have a good run. Thank you for watching.